Oh, is that backwards? Oh, hey, if you're already viewing, this starts at 2 o'clock. I just logged in early to make sure I could totally work the computer today. So keep checking your calls and emails. And if you are logging in because you have questions about your listing presentation or how to make it stronger and better so that you can have a better 2017 real estate, make sure you use the chat window over on the side, and I will do my very best to answer questions as we go. Yes, I have my earbuds on because frankly there are a lot of people in my office today and they keep talking outside my door, so I'm trying really hard to minimize these distractions. So hang tight, we will be starting in 8 minutes. That's not right. Don't freak out, I'll get it fixed. This is why I logged on early. So again, if you're logging in a little bit early, we are starting in 6 minutes now. I just turned it on early so that I could make sure it was working. Welcome, and don't forget to use the chat window over in your right-hand sidebar if you have questions as we go, or if you have questions to start with. And a little piece of information that you didn't know when you signed up, I have added an additional source to this, and you're going to be super duper excited to find out about that because it will help with your buyers and with your sellers. Hello, everybody who's logging in. We are starting in 3 minutes. You do see everything on the screen because I turned it on early, so just finish your emails, get your notepad ready, and By the way, if you are listening to this, you are going to receive a recorded copy of the webinar. So if you don't get your notes in quickly enough, never fear, it will all work out. So we will be starting in 3 minutes. All right, everybody, we are starting in 1 minute. So grab that last cup of coffee and have your notes ready. And we are going to dig in just 1 minute. And it is straight up 2 o'clock. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar where we are going to talk your listing. So a lot of y'all may have heard me present before. What we're going to dig into today are the actual tools and how to explain them so that when you're putting together a listing presentation, you can take the focus away from you, the most awesome realtor in the world, because the consumer doesn't care about you being an awesome realtor. All they care about is what you're going to do for them and what education you can bring to them, because we all know that our consumers are all over the internet figuring out as much as they can before they call us, but they sometimes get overwhelmed by what they find. They don't know what it means, how it affects their home and their sale. So your job as their professional is to take control of the situation and help them see what they should be focusing on. So we are going to, how do I advance the slides? Sometimes I think I have it figured out and then I don't. So bear with me for a second because PowerPoint's not advancing. And there we go. Okay. So the first thing I want you to think about is as you're approaching a listing and you're talking to a seller, often they want to spend about an hour with us looking at stuff on the house. And I don't know about y'all, but I get so tired of looking at linen closets because you go in every listing and they want you to look at the linen closet. And y'all, even if a house doesn't have one, it doesn't affect the value. I've never seen a house value affected by the linen closet, but the sellers get really hung up on these details about their houses. They want to show you their pull down stairs, especially if it's in a neighborhood where the builder charged an extra $750 to install it. They want to show you the overhead lights, and our builders, and frankly, that's where I learned it. They call them those boob lights. You know, the ones in the picture here, they come 2 in a box from Lowe's. And you have to use your imagination to know why we call them boob lights. But you know, they cost about $6 for the pair. And our sellers think they're worth money in the secondary bedrooms because why? They paid extra to have it installed. And then in these secondary bedrooms, they'll say, hey, ours is 10 by 11. The neighbors only have 10 by 10. They get really hung up on things that don't affect their value. The one that really does become something you got to pay attention to, though, y'all, is this cable and phone outlet situation. Because if they're going to show you that they have cable and phone outlets in every room, you know a couple of things about this seller. You know that they probably aren't totally in tune with what wireless means to us today, and you know you probably should go a little slower explaining DocuSign because they're a little bit behind the times in general. So when you think about items like this, it's very similar to everything else that you're looking at in the house. The sellers don't understand what has value and what doesn't have value. They know what cost money and what didn't cost money, but that, as you know, as the realtor professional, does not always equate to value. So this is where we're going to take our seller in an effort to avoid this hour-long conversation about why the linen closet and stairs and lighting and bedrooms and cable and phone outlets in every room don't affect their value. So what I want you to do when you get to their home is really old school and really simple. I want you to have a piece of paper, a notepad. I prefer to use yellow legal pads for a couple of reasons. One is that being yellow, it's visually arresting to the seller, and then they see what you're doing. And there's a very specific reason for using paper and not using your devices, your iPads, your phones. Y'all, you love to use your devices, and I get that, and you think you look really cool with them. I think some of y'all look cool too. Some of y'all do not look cool with your devices. You know, just saying. But when you're doing device work, the seller does not know if you're completely focused on them. You might say, well, Leigh Brown, I turn on my airplane mode. I do not take any incoming information while I'm with the seller. And I hear you saying that, but your seller does not know that your iPad's on airplane mode or in do not disturb mode. They just see you writing on it, and they really don't know if you're taking notes or if you're Facebooking, texting, tweeting, Candy Crushing. So I like to go old school. And the best thing to do as you're approaching this listing in a new way is ask the seller when you get to the home, may I make a few notes? And that sounds really simplistic, y'all, but we've gotten away from asking permission in today's world. We've gotten so self-centered and bossy, and we just don't remember how nice it is to have somebody ask. So say, may I make a few notes? The seller will say yes. This means you no longer have to be that realtor who thinks they have to memorize a house. And that's something a lot of y'all do, and I get it. You know your market, you know your houses. However, you're going to get back to the office and then they don't list it for a month. And then you're stuck with your memory and you remember half of it, and your seller expected you to remember all of it. And then you got to call them and ask them because you got the MLS wrong or the marketing materials are crap. So don't do that to yourself. Take good, copious notes. The other thing that taking notes does for you is that when you see the linen closet and the pull down stairs and the overhead lighting, you can then say, all right, and you write it down. When you're trying to memorize it, a lot of y'all go overboard and like, oh yes, look at this linen closet. It's just so nice. Oh, these secondary bedrooms are just ginormous. You can get even a full bed in here, not just the twin. So you go overboard making it sound great because you're trying to remember it, and also you're trying to suck up to the seller. That's not the most helpful thing in the world, but you're also doing yourself a disservice, because the more you suck up to them about the wrong stuff, the more you have to undo what you said when you get down to numbers. So instead of going down that road, be the professional who says, may I take notes? Write your notes, and that way when you get to the table and they want to bring up that linen closet, you say, I have it written down right here. We can include that in our marketing description, but it doesn't affect value. You're not undoing what you unnecessarily could have done by sucking up. The other thing you'll notice on my picture here is pencil. I do take notes on a listing with pencil, and that's because pencils create an audible sound. When you use a really smooth pen, and I'm a pen and pencil snob, I'm paper snob, I'm weird like that. If you're using a really smooth pen, they can't hear you taking notes. So make sure that you're touching people how they learn. Some people learn visually, some learn orally, and some learn kinesthetically. And so when you're using paper and pencil, you can hit them on all those levels. So the reason I dig into that first is because I want you to think about your listing presentation differently. You're going to be in charge now. You're going to have to really be educated before you get to the house. And this means not being scared of the information that you have. Now, as we get into the listing, this is actually in our team listing presentation we have for iPad, and I recommend that you do the same thing. You're welcome to use my slide if you want to. You notice that it is watermarked at the bottom because you have to have my permission to use it. But make sure that when you go into that listing, you tell the seller, thank you for asking me to your home. I want you to know that I am a realtor. I'm not just a real estate licensee. And as a realtor, I agreed to abide by the code of ethics. And that's not just like on your iPhone, your terms of service, where y'all click OK without even reading it. In fact, if you're a realtor listening to this right now, go back and read the code of ethics. I know most of my colleagues haven't read it. You've read snippets of it in your ethics class. You might have read it back when you got your realtor orientation done at the board. But go back and read it again now that you are a really seasoned professional. You'll be amazed at how much fantastic marketing advantage there is to you by talking about the code of ethics to the consumer, which helps the consumer understand what makes a realtor different than a real estate licensee or different than a website. So I love to explain to sellers that in my business, we are very focused on standard of practice 1.3. And this means that we shall not deliberately mislead the owner as to market value. And that's why we're going to dig into the data we're going to dig into. As your realtor professional who strictly abides by the code of ethics, I do a lot of research to make sure that I'm not misleading you at any way. And so you won't find me throwing a number at you that I can't defend. You will not have me agree to a price that I know is too high, because that will be violating the realtor code of ethics. And when you show them this, y'all, their eyes get real wide because nobody else in your marketplace is talking about this. So from here, we're going to talk about what appraisers mean to your seller. And a lot of realtors talk about the appraisal process only when it becomes an issue. That's when they feel like they should talk to sellers about it. They just kind of keep their mouth shut in the meantime. I like to address things up front. And what you'll find is that when you start educating your seller up front, you win more listings, and you also have fewer issues down the road because they know that you weren't trying to hide anything from them. You weren't trying to be secretive and keep the realtor secrets to yourself. Our consumers today know more than they've ever known, and they really like it when we honor that by sharing with them what we know about what matters to them. So what you'll find in talking to your sellers is that if they owned their house during the dark years, and so that's going to be 2007 through 2013, they might not like appraisers very much at all. Now, a lot of y'all do because you're friends with them. You've worked with them for a long time. You don't understand why anybody would dislike an appraiser unless, you know, it comes in sideways or it's somebody from out of market. But your seller's perception of appraisal is different. If y'all can remember back in 9 and 10 and 11 when we had interest rates at 2, 2.25, 2.5%, a lot of your past clients and your sellers today wanted to refinance to get those great rates. And when they went to refinance, their credit was great and they had everything else lined up, but the appraisal did not come in at a value that would allow them to refinance, so they could not get those great rates. Well, that creates for them a negative impression of the appraisal process because they want to pin it on somebody. And y'all know how your consumers are. They really want somebody to be at fault when something goes wrong. So what you want to explain to your seller here is that everything we're about to look at, all of the data we're going to put together and accumulate, is designed to help me as your realtor professional defend your price when it comes time to appraisal. Now, I cannot influence or try to sway the appraiser, but I can give them tons of information and data that will allow them to pull together the best possible report for us once we're under contract. When we have an appraisal that does not match the contract price, that's when this will be the most important information in the world. And the appraisers are not our enemies. They just don't know everything about your house and about the neighborhood. So I want you to understand that the reason we're going to dig into this, and for some of you, for some of my sellers, this is too much information. I get that. You're not a geek. I'm totally honor that, and we will skim through it if you need me to stop being too detailed. But I want you to understand one of the biggest reasons, besides educating you, is to prepare me to defend you to the appraiser, because that could save you $5,000, $10,000, $30,000. All right, this is a list of the sources we are going to use as we put together a comprehensive picture of the market around your house. We're going to dig into each one of these in detail, okay? So the first thing I show to any seller is my Zestimate. Now, you know what it feels like to go on a listing presentation and the seller slides that Zestimate across the table at you and says, look what we got. And it's kind of like that whole used car, buying a car relationship where they slide a price at you and you slide a price back. And as realtors, you get really, really defensive when they have a Zestimate that it's not correct. Because first of all, y'all don't like websites giving values. I get that. I don't really like it either, but I don't really care because it doesn't affect how I'm going to price the house. But instead of getting into a confrontational picture with the seller, use your own house. It's a great way to talk about the shortcomings of an automated website while being human. Because when I show them that my house value is wrong, they know that theirs may also be inaccurate. So I show them my house. No big secret, I live in Harrisburg, North Carolina. So a lot of the data you're going to see are what I would pull around my house, and everything you'll see, unless you're in Canada, would be mostly available in your market. So when I show them my house on Myers Lane, I say, look, the Zillow thinks my house is worth $334,400. All right, y'all, my house is worth about $400 right now. And I know that because I sell houses and I know my neighborhood very well. So, Mr. Seller, if I were selling my house for this estimate, I'd be leaving a very large chunk of money on the table. So again, you see, I'm not attacking theirs estimate. I'm explaining why mine is wrong and why I would never price my house with it. So it also shows them that my house is 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath. Well, the seller needs to understand that Zillow's information comes out of the tax records. So if I had 3.5 bath, would that affect my value? Absolutely. Would a 3rd bedroom change my value? Sure. Would a 5th bedroom? Yes. So Zillow's information is only coming off the tax card, so it's only as accurate as the tax card that's available. One thing that's interesting is Zillow thinks I have 2726 square feet. I actually have just under 3,100 square feet. Now, in every state, there is an allowable variance for square footage because it's not an exact science, but a 400-foot variance is definitely outside of the variance, and that's going to affect my value. So Zillow doesn't know that. With that being said, I like to explain to sellers why their estimate is often inaccurate. And I put it that way. Please don't say that Zillow's wrong, because it's not that they're wrong. They're not doing it on purpose and to be misleading or any of that. It's just a website. It just happens to be inaccurate. So think about the language that you're using when you're explaining these things to your seller clients. And I like to explain that Zillow is inaccurate because there's 3 things that Zillow can't account for. And I probably should have made a slide with the 3 things, but I didn't. So here's where you want to write this down. The 3 things that Zillow can never account for are your location, your condition, and your upgrades. So the location, I want you to think about it in terms of topography. So hold your arm up where you've got a level field between your fingertips and your elbow. And what you want to show, that I do this for my sellers so they can have a visual when I'm explaining location. I ask them if a house on this lot that goes from fingertip to elbow nice and flat, would that house have a different value if I suddenly slung my hand up and I was on a very sloped lot? And they know that it does. You know that it does. So when you show them that the same house on a different topography changes their value, it's a light bulb for why there's estimates inaccurate, because Zillow can't account for topography. The second thing Zillow can't account for is condition. And if you want to think about a way to describe condition, I want you to think about a new construction neighborhood where you have the same floor plan built 3 in a row, and they just have different elevations, to make the builder happy. So you've got the same house 3 in a row, and then in one of those houses, you've got the person who is OCD. Nothing ever touches the floor. Nobody can take their shoes off in the house. It's immaculately clean. The second house is normal people, and the third house has 6 kids, 4 dogs, 2 cats, and a goldfish. And so all 3 of those houses are the same square footage, bedrooms, bathrooms, same location really, because they're on next door lots, and they were the same builder. They have all the same upgrade package. But the one that has been immaculately cared for will definitely pull a premium over the one that's been lived in hard by all the kids and the animals. And your sellers suddenly, again, they get this because they understand now why some houses sell more than others. You're starting to explain how all of the staging and upgrades are going to affect price, but you're using Zillow to do that, and that's really powerful. And at the same time, by the way, you're giving them permission to go ahead and look at Zillow because it is a fantastic website for data and for consumers to poke around and get to know neighborhoods and to see pictures of houses and see days on market and price reductions and all that stuff. So don't dissuade them from playing around on the website. Just show them why it's a good thing they called you. Now, the third thing that Zillow can't account for is upgrades. And you guys all know this. If you have those same 3 houses, and let's say that Susie Q OCD has now cleaned all 3 of them equally, and one's got builder basic carpet, builder basic vinyl, builder basic laminate countertops, and the one next door went in and did brand new carpet and redid all their paint and added granite and changed the appliances. Which one sells for more? Well, you know, duh, the one that has all of the new things in it. And the key here is think about the items that you don't need a permit to upgrade. So if you're talking about screen porches, that's totally an upgrade that would affect your value, but it might be reflected in this estimate because they're going off tax records. So if it shows up in the permits, that could already have been reflected. So think about the non-permit items that you know as a realtor totally changed the number on a house, and they also changed the speed at which it sells. I would also remind you here, as we're talking about Zillow, be watching them in first quarter because they're introducing some new angles to their algorithm that will incorporate AI, which is artificial intelligence. They've got some new bots that are looking at the listing photos of houses. They're looking for granite, and they're looking for fully staged homes and outdoor fireplaces, and a lot of those things that we know can set a house apart. Zillow's looking for those in an effort to tighten up their numbers. So if you're going to be the better professional in the market who's more important than the website, this is what you have to stay on top of so that you can address it, answer the questions about it, and still showcase why you as the realtor professional still bring something more to the table. So again, the 3 things that Zillow does not account for would be location, condition, and upgrades. All right, so now my seller friends, we're going to take you to the 30,000 foot view. So when we go to the 30,000 foot view, I want to start with some federal data. Now this website you see at the top here, you can go to it anytime. It's consumerfinance.gov/HMDA. That's the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. This was part of a FOIA data dump. That's the Freedom of Information Act data dump that happened a couple years ago that will show us in any state what happens in terms of the types of loans that are being approved. And this is really interesting, my seller friends. So I've pulled up all of North Carolina here. Now, in my town of Harrisburg, which is a suburb of Charlotte, it's going to behave differently than somewhere in Wilmington at the coast, or in Asheville in the mountains, or Lumberton in the rural part of the eastern state. So, but this is just to give you a picture for how loans fall in our state in general. What you'll see is that this tall lime green bar, that's conventional loans. And conventional loans have stayed fairly steady. They spiked in 14. And oh, by the way, it is a federal site. So your data goes as current as 2015. This will probably update in first or second quarter. So it's really just for informational purposes. This is not where we're pricing your house. This is so you know things about your market. Conventional loans means more than 5% down. We love these loans because it's a less stringent appraisal process. You don't have all of the government inspector hoops to jump through, and we love them. So the more down payment a buyer puts down, the better off we're going to be. Now you're going to ask me, Leigh, why are you talking about this now? We haven't priced the house. We don't have the listing. I get that. Your whole point here is to showcase what kind of a realtor professional you are, that you're going to educate them on what kinds of offers are best, what kind of buyers are best. This is so much more valuable to a consumer than you sitting there saying, we're number one, we have advertisements and agents. Because what does that mean? It means nothing. So just think past all of that, okay? So work with me. The second thing you're going to see is over here, this next lime green bar is FHA loans. That's the Federal Housing Agency. And so we love FHA loans. They help buyers who have a little less in the way of down payment, so 3.5% down, who have a slightly less than perfect credit score, but still very reasonable. They don't have crazy high default rates and didn't even during the downturn, but they're still good buyers. However, I want you to know, my seller friend, if this kind of loan comes across, and you'll see it's a pretty decent shot here in North Carolina because we are well within the loan limits in most markets, this means that that buyer is going to come with a string attached, and that string is a government inspection. which will include a list of possible repairs. And when we get that list from the government inspector, I need you to understand they are non-negotiable. When this buyer, this little conventional person with 20% down who is old school, brings us a buyer and then they bring us an inspection report with some repairs, we negotiate that list. We're going to figure out the best thing for you. But when this buyer, the government buyer, brings us an inspection list, that's not negotiable. So we're going to budget in on this offer paying for repairs. Now, side note to y'all, North Carolina, the biggest things we see from an FHA inspection are going to be peeling paint on an older home, or that stupid handrail they want on 3 steps that your sellers put together with 2 2x4s and make it look really kind of homemade and pitiful. We see that a lot. So I can explain to my sellers that's the most common things we see asked for. So if your home is older and you've got peeling paint, you better get after it now if we're going to get an FHA buyer. And in some price ranges, that's your best chance of a buyer. In your market, those might not be the top 2 things. And if you don't know, call your favorite appraiser and ask on FHA, what are the most common things you see coming back from inspectors? This allows you to provide another angle for why you're the best realtor in the marketplace, because you've done the research and you can prepare them now. And it's not that I'm giving away the farm so that my competitors get all these secrets, because frankly, my really great competitors already know this too. It's just the time frame in which I present it is giving me an advantage in the marketplace. The third bar you see on here that has held fairly steady, again, went up in 14, held pretty good, that's our VA loans. Now, North Carolina is one of the most military-friendly states in the country. We're very, very proud of that. And it's a very important question to ask your sellers is, oh, by the way, do you guys have a VA loan on this property, or have you served in the military? Did you know you had access to this? A lot of realtors never ask their buyers and sellers if they have ever served in the military, and some of them don't know that the VA loan process is actually far easier than it used to be. It's not that expensive the first time around. Second time around, it gets real steep, but it's a wonderful way to set yourself, again, apart as the professional. So tell them we love our veteran buyers. When we get their offer, I guess it's going to be the same thing as FHA. Lower down payment, 0% is one of the advantages of serving our country in the military. And it comes with a government inspector, and the government inspection is going to come with what kind of repairs? Non-negotiable. And so I try not to put it down as a required repair, because that comes across differently than non-negotiable, because y'all all know when you tell a seller something's required, they want to argue with you. If you explain that it's non-negotiable, they understand better that it's not you digging in your heels. You're helping them understand what they go through in dealing with a government inspection. So it's still a very good chance that North Carolina will get a VA offer. And then we still have a lot of these RHS loans. That's Rural Home Services. Y'all know it as USDA, which I think most of us, frankly, did not even know USDA fiddled around in home loans until we got to the recession and we desperately needed something for those houses in rural areas that needed creative financing, aka mobile homes and trailers. So rural home houses, we still have a lot of those loans in North Carolina, although it has gone down because the other loan types that are out there are still pretty feasible in a low interest rate environment. USDA is 0% down, as y'all know. And one thing I would tell you here is that before you get to the listing, if you are thinking it's got any chance at all of being a USDA house, look it up on the eligibility website so that you can go into the listing. And at this point, you can say, hey, by the way, Mr. Seller, I looked you up. You guys are actually one of the lucky eligible houses. That's going to give us a huge advantage in marketing your house because it will open up a special part of the buyer pool to us. Woo! So help them see that you're looking for a way to uniquely position their home before you even get there. Now, with this being said, oh, by the way, on rural home loans, make sure you explain to the seller that like these, it may come with non-negotiable repairs, but the thing about USDA loans is that if you're in a time crunch, we're probably not going to mess with USDA because there's nothing set in stone about a closing date on USDA, because if there's money in the bucket, it can close, and if the bucket's empty, it ain't closing until Congress fills the bucket back up. And so these closing dates can be fairly fluid. Just the more you can educate them up front. I know y'all, they don't retain it because you're giving them so much information at one time, but when it comes back up later, their memory will jog that you did talk to them about this once. And so just remember, the more educated your sellers are, the better you'll have a relationship with them and the better you can guide them in the process. Second website I'm going to take you to, and obviously I'm terrible with slides because I cut off the top of my website here, but it's FHFA.gov. That's the Federal Housing Finance Agency. Now, by the way, y'all know I don't really care a whole lot about the federal government. The reason we provide federal data is just not only to give a 30,000-foot view, but because the consumer does believe that realtors like to polish information before we hand it out. So when I give out federal information, it comes with a level of credibility, right or wrong, that the consumer believes in. So thinking about this, we are going to pull the MSA. That's your metropolitan statistical area. So according to census data, what area acts like itself? So if you're thinking my suburb of Harrisburg, we belong to the Charlotte MSA. So Charlotte is called Charlotte, Concord, Gastonia. Concord on the north side, Gastonia on the south side, and it does say North Carolina/South Carolina because we sit on the state line. So look for what MSA you belong to, and it'll give you this next level down data. So we're coming down from the 30,000-foot view, getting a little closer to their house. So this website, actually more updated than the last one. Woohoo! Their most recent data right now is third quarter of 16. So that's actually pretty decent for federal stuff, so go them. What we're doing here is showing them the HPI. Now, if you didn't do economics in college and you're not a numbers person, don't throw up. It's not that hard to figure out what the housing price index is. All this means is that if you had a bucket of things, so a bucket of consumer goods, and you looked at their price today versus their price yesterday and their price tomorrow, this is assuming that they are priced on the same rate of increase or rate of decrease. That index is going to be based on inflation and some other factors. So this is what the government would make your house worth if they didn't know your house. They just knew what you paid for. They're only looking at price and then put it in the bucket with other things. So this is not, Mr. Seller, the price of your home. It's just what the government would think you were worth if they didn't know you. So what I did here is my little hypothetical house was purchased in fourth quarter of 7. Oh, you know, because that's my personal house. We did buy in December of 2007, which is proof I did not know a recession was coming because I was like the most high sale in my neighborhood for, I don't know, 4 or 5 freaking years, but that's fine because I love my house, not going anywhere. So this seller bought their house in fourth quarter of 7. In some markets, that means your market was already down. In some markets, you were just starting to go down like Charlotte was. In other markets, you were still hanging tight. So the Midwest took longer to go down than the rest of the country and didn't go down as far. So anyway, fourth quarter of 7 was their purchase. We're running the value in third quarter of 16, and I paid $397.5 for my house. So the government would think my house is worth $466. All right, I already told y'all that's way more than my house is worth right now. I could never sell it for that. So I don't price it based on their number. One thing I'll tell you here, though, by the way, is that if I were doing this listing presentation, I would not show the estimated value to somebody if the value's showing as 466 and it should be 400, because y'all know if a seller sees 466 and it's worth 400, they will expect 466 for the house. So don't set an expectation that's not reasonable. What you can do here is show them the price graph, though. So if I just say this not to be not transparent and not to be hiding things from people, because frankly, it's a public website. They could go there. But I want to show them what's happened in their market for trends. So show them the price trends. So when this seller bought, prices, it says they went up for a quarter, which that's kind of a lie, but then we went right straight downhill, bumped around in the gully for a little bit, came up and then went down, up and then down, up and then down, up and down, and now we've gone up a good bit. And so what you want to show your seller with this graph is that when prices go up, at some point they're going to go down. And I leave a blank in the sentence and I make them fill in the blanks. And the reason for that, y'all, is not to be condescending. It's to keep your seller engaged, because the average adult attention span right now is less than 4 minutes. And with that being said, you want to help them understand that they've got to stay focused with you. Kathleen, on this one, I'm only going back to when they bought it. So you look at the purchase quarter on this website. So this house that I'm using, this theoretical house, was bought in fourth quarter of 7. If they bought their house in fourth quarter of 4, but you just look at it based on when they bought it on the tax card and poke that into purchase quarter. And actually, if they bought it in like 2 or 3, they're going to have a way bumpier graph than you'd see on this house. And so it's just an opportunity to show them how the market moves. The reason I want them seeing the market moving is because they have to understand that prices are fluid. And I think all of y'all that are seasoned vets, you know, you've given a price on a listing before, and then it takes them 6 months to be ready to sell, and they want the price that you gave them 6 months ago. Well, something changed in the market and the price went down, but the seller doesn't understand that, because our sellers don't often understand that pricing is fluid. So this is your chance to say prices go up and prices go down. So when I make them fill in the blank, they are now listening to the up and down part, and I can help them see that pricing is fluid. So when we're looking at pricing today, that may not be the price when they're ready to sell, and we will update our data when it's time for them to sell. The next website I use is realtytrack.com, and I'll be honest with you, I don't pay for RealtyTrack. I used to back in the dark years when we had a bunch of foreclosure leads, and they still do have memberships available. They got that little get 7 days free thing on there. They'll send you buyer leads. But for me right now, I'm just using the free version of the site so that I can get a good heat map on what's happening for what I like to call the soft underbelly of the market. So that's going to be the short sales and foreclosures and auctions. What a lot of your sellers don't understand is that there's always a soft underbelly to the market, that no matter what's happening in the overall economy, there is always somebody out there that ain't paying the bills, and things happen, and people are going to have this go on. And so I want my sellers to look at this map, and they will see that the orange ones are bank owned in my area, the red ones are auctions, the purples are pre-foreclosures. And a pre-foreclosure, as y'all know, hey, that's somebody that's not paying the bills right now, and they're trying to maybe catch up, or it's their last ditch effort. So when I show this, I'm like, this is way the hell better than it was a few years ago, and I'm very grateful for that. But what I want them to know is that, you know what, in your neighborhood, you know that house that's 3 streets over, it's been vacant for 5 years, yard's mowed, HOAs are paid, no signs ever been in the yard, nobody's lived in it, and they all nod like, yeah, they all know that house, because there's one in every neighborhood, because y'all know that the banks and the hedge funds have been sitting on these houses that they bought during the worst of the market, and they're waiting on the equity numbers to come up enough to make their balance sheets happy, and they can cut them loose. And that's a lot of banker talk, but you better know banker talk if you're in real estate. So anyway, I explained to them that those houses are their competition, and we just don't know how or when they'll be the competition. What I'll tell y'all is that if you look at the bigger picture of economic data, it's highly likely that we're going to see a recession. And certainly it's not supposed to be as bad as when we came out of, but we should see some kind of recessionary time within the next, I don't know, 12 to 24 months. The target's moving right now. So when we hit that period, that's when the banks and hedge funds are likely to cut some of those listings loose and catch their gains before the market moves down again. So I tell my people that not to scare them, but so that they understand that if the banks and hedge funds cut any of those houses loose, it just sucks a buyer out of the marketplace. Whether or not it hits their numbers, it could affect demand. And when demand is hit, then it can change prices. And the demand piece is really critical, because our sellers don't often understand that even if they are in a perfectly perfect 10 plus house, when our buyers call us, y'all know this, they all ask y'all, how do I get a list of foreclosures? They want to know what the deals are. And we know there's not a ton out there right now, and they're not always priced to be a deal, but buyers ask for them, and they will buy them and pay too much just because it says foreclosure. So I showcase this just as an informational piece, and I generally on this one just spend about a minute showing this is the soft underbelly of the market. It's not an issue right now, but you know, we're always keeping an eye on things so that we're ahead of the curve. And I'll also point out, if I see one that looks like a smoking deal, like here's a house for, I can't read on the screen because it's too small. Let's just say this one for $74,000 over here. I love to point out that it's a fantastic time to be buying rental properties, because rents are up and climbing. And actually, if we hit another recessionary period, there's nothing better to own than real estate, because these people who lose their houses in the soft underbelly turn into renters again. So if you want to talk investments, we can set a second appointment and talk about purchases. We're not going to do that today. So I kind of leave a breadcrumb there so I can catch them later. All right, did I skip the free? Okay, RPR. Guys, if you're not using this, you have got to use it. It's like the best tool ever. And what I like it best on is my iPad. There's an iPad app version that's so slick and pretty to use. The screenshot you've got here is the one that came out of my browser on my desktop, but the iPad version is so daggum slick and awesome. So the reason RPR is great is that it's going to give you tons of demographic data about the seller and the area they live in. And it's demographic data you can use and share because it came from the census. So it's not going to violate federal fair housing, and it will keep you safe when you're tempted to answer questions that you shouldn't answer, which I know that's hard for all of us to remember, that there's things we just can't say. So let the report do the talking for you. And that's why I make a note on here. It's great for buyers. When I work a buyer, I try to avoid it, honestly, because I like working sellers. But when I have one, I can hand on my iPad and say, oh, you want to know this neighborhood? Hey, here's this app, put in the address, Shazam. And then they can see what kind of jobs people have in that area, what the average age is, how many kids, that kind of fun stuff. So make sure you use this report. For the sellers, I like to point out that, again, the estimate's wrong, and this is a National Realtor report because, oh, by the way, there is no national real estate market. This is why I don't want y'all focusing on the Case-Shiller Index and don't want y'all watching NBC Nightly News trying to figure out how we're going to price your house, because there is no national market. We're going to look at the market around your house, because the national real estate stuff says my house is worth $354,600, and while that's better than my estimate, it still ain't what my house is worth. So we're not going to pay that any attention. And what cracks me up, y'all, is that RPR thinks that's a 5-star confidence that it's right, but my real price is ahead of the actual range. So I don't price my house with this. The beauty of this report is actually when you go deeper in and you can show those demographic graphs. Now, what I like to explain to people is this. If they're in a neighborhood, let's just say, for example, where there are no children left, it's all 55 plus, but it's not age restricted. I like to tell them we're going to market your house to the people who match these demographics. And so if I'm going to place an ad on Facebook for your property, am I going to pick buyers that are, let's just say, 45 and up? Absolutely, because they may be looking for that area. I don't want to run that Facebook ad in front of a 28 to 35-year-old because this report tells us that's probably not our most likely buyer. So it's just a way to show them how you can be more focused in your approach so that it makes sense for them. And again, this is not talking about the fair housing stuff. This is about matching the area to the marketing that you're doing. All right, now this, y'all, is my #1 most favorite tool when I'm doing anything with my business. In fact, if there were 3 things that I could not run my real estate business without, honestly, I couldn't run it without Dropbox or DocuSign or Altos Research. This, I can't tell you how much I love it. I've got $ on the screen here because it is the one thing I'm going to show you today that will cost you money, because it's not free, but it's not that expensive. And what you pay for it will depend on what zip codes you want access to. Now, I'm in a metro market, so I've got like 5 pages of zip codes. So my account is $179 a month. I think most of the realtors that I know who have started using this are spending about $79 a month. And actually, I want to show you why I love this report. And I'm going to be brave and bold here and screen share a different place on my screen. So bear with me for 1 second. Hey, everybody, there I am. Let's go to desktop, I think is where I want to go. Oh, that's a different report I'm going to show you in a minute. No, don't get your hopes up. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so now you should be able to see the executive summary for Harrisburg, North Carolina, and it should be visible on your screen. Let me find my webinar thing here again and make sure you can still see it. Can you see that at all when I hit screen share? Am I sharing that on the screen? It went away again. Somebody over in the chat block, tell me if you can see Altos Research. Is it on my desktop? You should see my desktop right now. Anybody over there that can hit what you can see in the chat block? Oh, I clicked away from it, sorry. I'll leave it there for a second. Well, anyway, I'll have this for you. If you cannot see this, I'll include this in your, well, it'll be in your slides when you get them after the program. Oh, you can't see it, Kathleen? Thank you for letting me know. Dadgummit, there was an easy way to do this, and I probably don't have it. Oh, there it is, Shazam. Now, okay, look, there you go. Oh, hey, Ann, I'm glad I saw y'all for a second. Now, anybody see the executive summary now? And let's see, I just put it on the screen, so it should be up now. It should be a yes now. I changed my screen share. Anybody? Anybody? Bueller? Bueller? I see no. You can see me, but I moved myself. So Anybody, can you see that now as I changed my screen? Yes, thank you, Jan. Okay, see, Jan's in Baltimore. Y'all should call her for your Baltimore needs. Okay, so what you'll see here is the reason I love Altos. It is data that updates every 7 days, and it is third party, and so it's not coming from the MLS. This is coming from the people who do data, so that's why your consumers will believe in it. It's also a really great way. So it's done by zip code. So we started at the 30,000 foot view, Bethesda, sorry, Jan. So the 30,000 foot view, we narrowed down closer and closer. So now we are in the zip code around their house. Now, I tell y'all, if your consumers are not nerds, at this point, they might be getting a little antsy. So you're going to have to tell them to hang with you because you're getting real close to their numbers, but you're trying to get them educated here. So this one, you'll see the median list price in my zip code this week is $375. Median, of course, be in the middle. You got high and low. And then what you'll see here is that the report will tell them what's happening in the market. And I love this sentence because you can train your consumers to read this, and they will now know what's happening, all right? Inventory has been decreasing lately, but the market action index, that, y'all, is just supply and demand. So that means demand is falling, and days on market are climbing. So that creates relatively negative implications for the market. Now, some of that's going to be seasonal. As we know, we're coming out of Christmas, for New Year. We had ice and snow this past week in our area. But you're letting the seller understand what's happening. And this will move from week to week. And one of the reasons I love this report is that it updates every 7 days. And this is available in your market. You can get a free sample on altosresearch.com, and you'll see why I'm in love with it. So I'm going to take actually, before I take my seller into the report, y'all, you want to ask them a question and ask them, are y'all heavy geeks, medium geeks, or mild geeks? Geek is a really complimentary term now. It was not when I was growing up in the 80s, but it's a compliment to call somebody a geek now. But let them tell you how much of this information they want. If somebody's a super mild person, you're going to hit a couple of highlights and cruise. If they're a heavy geek, like an engineer or an accountant, this is going to excite the hell out of them because most realtors don't give enough data. And your engineers and accountants crave data. By the way, that's 35% of the population. So you can really do a change in your business right here. Excuse me, I had to take a sip of something there. Okay, so over here in the real-time market profile, this is your active inventory. This is what's happening in the market right now with the unsold houses. So instead of calling them actives, make sure you call them unsold. Over here, the median list is 375 and it's holding flat. Let them understand not all prices are hitting the cover off the ball because y'all, they're watching HGTV and everything they watch is telling them that houses are selling for 40% above ask with no contingencies and the world is wonderful and woo, it's going to sell in 5 minutes. And that's not every market and it's not every house. The asking price per square in my zip code is flat. Average days on market is moving up. It's at 130. And when you show them 130, look them dead in the eye and say, did y'all know that? Because on Facebook, their friends are all talking about selling a house in 5 minutes. And they don't understand that it might take a little longer depending on their house. And then I want to show them what's happening with supply and demand. And with supply and demand, you could see demand is slightly moving down. That means we're just in a holding pattern. And frankly, y'all, I'm kind of happy for a holding pattern because I hate bidding wars. Multiple offers make my stomach hurt. And I also hated the recessionary trends too. That sucked. So stable, I love. So let's look at supply and demand. This black line running across the bottom, that is a balanced market. Equal buyers, equal sellers. You see that my suburb generally bumps around equal. We went into a little bit of a seller's market at the middle of 15, bumped down, had a pretty decent market in the front half of 16, but look how it pulled down. And a lot of y'all know this. Your markets went quiet long before the holidays, and usually we go quiet at the holidays, but it went quiet earlier. A lot of that has to do with it being a presidential year. This tends to happen every 4 years. We can look at it because consumers get so focused on politics, they're not thinking about real estate. Well, now we've all seen the markets have picked back up post-election, and we're hoping that trend will continue for a little while. But here in Harrisburg, we're still seeing it pulling pretty level. What that means, my seller friend, is that you might have to do a little negotiating. It means buyers might get a little bit of a break, but there's nobody that's leaving blood on the table. It's just not going to happen unless it's just a unique situation. And in the price graph, you see the relationship to the supply and demand. where we held flat for a while. Hey, demand was flat, prices were flat. Demand started to move up, prices started to move up. And here you see that we had this run up on demand in the middle of 16. We also had a little bit of a bump on price, but then what's interesting and beyond weird here is that we had a downturn on price while we had a downturn on demand, but then prices turned around and went back up. And some of that's going to have to do with the fact that interest rates started to move up by small bits in the fall. So this is where you're going to talk about those things that you know about your market and how it affects this seller. And this is the thing that most realtors are afraid to do because you don't think you're an expert at this, but I promise y'all, you know so much more about this than your consumers do. So be confident in what you already know, and then use things like graphs and charts to help supplement your confidence in yourself and be their expert. And then if they ask you internal details that you don't know the answer to, you just tell them, well, I don't know, but let me ask. And tell them you don't know and get back to them, okay? Don't fake it. There's no reason to do that. And down here at the bottom is where I love, love, love this report. So hang with me here. Now, if they've been mild geeks and they tuned out for a minute, I'm going to say, tune back in. I need you right here. This is what's really helpful, all right? So we are talking about my personal house, my $400,000 house. Obviously, I'm not in the top bracket in my area. I'm in the second bracket. So being in the second bracket, this is where you are putting the whole zip code into 4 buckets. Each bucket has an equal number of houses, okay? So if I look in my bucket, there are 18 available homes. That's the standing competition, okay? So I want to tell my sellers here, this is where you've got to consider that the buyers out there, they've seen all 18 of these. They might not have seen it in person, but they've seen them all on the internet. Every buyer, and you guys know this, they spend all night looking at every single house and every single photo before they select which ones to view. So they've seen all 18 of these and they have not sold. New will tell you new listings in the last 7 days. So there's no new competition for me in the past week if I were to list my house. That's a great reason to list if you're a seller. Be the new person on the street, because who's going to want to come see you? Every buyer. And then Absorbed is going to tell us contracts in that same 7-day window. So in this picture, we have nothing new that has sold in the last 7 days. So we don't have any real traffic, but we don't have a ton of inventory. Nothing new came in. By the way, in my bucket, it's an average of 119 days on market. Now, a lot of y'all are used to asking the question, well, what time frame would you like your house to sell in? Don't ask that question ever again. What I want you to do is use this report and say to your seller, so the average in your bracket is 119 days. How do you feel about that? I want you to shut up and listen. And your seller will tell you, well, I didn't think it was going to take 119 days to sell. And you can say, well, it might not, but that's the average. So what happens to you if you're on the average? They're going to tell you if they can live with that or not. That's 4 months. If they can't live with that, then that's where you can explain to them that the way you cut the average short is with a better price than the competition and with better condition. So you're going to tell them how they can cut the line, but here, let the numbers set the line. Your sellers sometimes need the house to sell in 30 days, but they don't tell you that because they're afraid that you're going to make them give it away. You don't have to do that anymore, okay? Just say to them, here's the average, how does that feel? But you got to let them answer, so don't try and throw suggestions at them. I will show you, it's interesting always to look at the cheap seats in any area. And the cheap seats in this zip code, we have 2 new in the last 7 days and 3 sold. And oh, by the way, seller, we don't know how many of the 3 that sold were new versus standing. But what I can tell you is this. We know that the best houses, if they're priced correctly and conditioned correctly for the price when they enter the market, they're likely to be one of those because the hot houses are selling very quickly. If you're not considered hot, you will fall into the stale category after about 10 days. So let them know what that environment looks like. It will change the game for your seller. I see why I love this report. The other thing I love about it, y'all, is that there's a contact manager in the system. And in the contact manager, I can plug in all of these sellers that I've met with, and they're not ready to sell for 6 months or a year. And y'all know we're realtors, we're ADD, and you're focused on the next person, and you don't really know how to follow up with the seller because you know what to do to a buyer. You send them houses. So with the seller, you don't do anything except say, thanks for having me over, and then you drop them. So you put them in the contact manager and you send them the zip code report every week. And I tell my sellers, I'm going to send you this every week. You're going to get updated on market conditions at the same time I am. So we're on the same page. So when you see these new and absorbed categories moving and you need to sell, call me and we'll get you on the market. And if you see that the implications are moving and maybe you need more money, you're waiting for prices to move up. I know, Harlan, I'm going to back to the slides. The report's available at altosresearch.com. Yes, Tammy, there's two separate reports. One is for single family and one's for condo. Because if your market's like mine, the condo market is entirely different than the single family market. So try Altos Research. I can't tell y'all enough how much I love them. Okay, now this is the other report that I use. So now we went down from the zip code, we're going to bracket it around their house. And this form looks like it looks on your screen, and I'm glad to send this to all of y'all when we send you the webinar after the recording is done processing. And I got this from the Crockett team in Mentor, Ohio. David and Judy Crockett, they've been big producers for years and years. They sold like 400 houses last year, and they share. And I just love realtors who share the things they do that work. And so I use this report, and it doesn't have a logo, and it's not fancy, okay? So sometimes it's better to not be fancy because consumers love to know that we're actually digging in and working on their behalf. So on this one, what you'll see is that buyer shop by comparison. So I'm going to walk my sellers through what they're going to understand about the MLS, because we like to talk about MLS as realtors in terms that are really slang for realtors: active, pending, sold. This says, number one, homes under contract are recent successes. And you put how many pending and how many days on market. You're going to do the same thing for actives and your expireds, but they don't call them expireds. It calls it market rejected. And that way, if you're talking to an expired seller, you're not telling them that anybody rejected them except the market. The market rejected the price for the condition the house was in. Because remember, always, every house does have a price, and often the condition is a piece of that. Now, number 4 is going to provide for you something that most realtors need to know, which is list price to sales price ratio. So, and by the way, up here at the top, you're putting in a price range and area for the target house. And if you know my house is 400, the buyer who buys my house would so much rather spend $300 or $350, but they could probably spend $450 or $500. So you bracket this around whatever house you're looking at. What would the buyer use up and down as they compare the house? Because we all know that if they spend $400, they're not just looking at $400,000 houses. And so that's where I'm drilling down. I forgot to mention that. All right, so let's look at this number 4. So in my sold bucket, so those houses, if they sold for an average of 98% of list, I'm setting my seller up right now to understand what it means to negotiate. Because on TV, everybody's getting above ask price and all their buddies are getting above ask price. But if the average house in their bucket is getting 98% and we get an offer that's at 96%, they're not going to feel like they're being lowballed and beat up. We'll say, hey, cool, they're in range to play tennis with them and get them up to the average. And if, let's say, the markets are worse and you're at a 90% of list price market and the offer comes in at 75, yeah, you can tell the seller we can pound sand with this buyer. They're way below market. They are lowballing. But this way they'll have a picture of what it means in their area. Also, this also helps with that seller who gets a full price offer and then turns greedy and says, hey, I want to wait 3 days and see if any other offers come in. Where you can say, look, the average is 98. I've gotten you 100%. If you're greedy, you could wind up losing 2% of value. So you can help them use numbers to stay focused and take the emotion out of this. And then number 6, by the way, we'll calculate absorption rate. A lot of y'all have taken those amazing ninja selling classes through CRS, and it's some of the best stuff ever. Larry Kendall developed that. And if you're not comfortable with absorption rate, all you do now is plug in the numbers from 1 through 5 and Shazam, you'll have absorption rate. And so if it shows you that in this bucket, there's 3 months of inventory, you can actually drill down further versus the question you asked over here about 119 days on market, that was okay with them. Well, what if we drill it down from 350 to 450 and it turns out to be 3 months of inventory, 90 days of inventory? They might feel more confident. They might feel more ready to sell the house because they're in a good place. So help them be positioned for the market. This is how you do it. The reason and the time that I do this, this should be done at the time of initial appointment. I like to do it again at 30 days on market so that I can update them if the house hasn't sold. And it's a great way to always be updating your CMA in a way that's more than pulling 3 comps. So I also want to remind you that after you pull all your, of course, back that up. After I present this, that's when I show the comps for their house. Personally, I do a live CMA. I open up the app for the local MLS and I run the comps sitting there with them. I'm not printing it before I get to the house. The reason for that, y'all, as realtors, you love to print 3 to 5 comps and go to the house, and then the seller throws you a curveball and says, well, that one was a divorce sale and they gave it away and you didn't use this one and you should, and they start to question your comps. When I do a live CMA, yes, I have to think on my feet, but I'm able to say, well, you mentioned the house on Elm, and I pull it up and it sold like 4 years ago. I'm like, yeah, that's a little outside of our parameters, but you can do it with the data and not just tell them they're wrong or feel really flustered when you get caught off your game. So that's why I do a live CMA. So after I do the live CMA, I'm going to do the net proceeds sheet. Now with my net proceeds, we use a 3-column version. Most realtors, I love it when you use the net proceeds sheet. So kudos if you're already using one. If you're not, you'll be amazed to find that this is one of the biggest ways you can set yourself apart in your marketplace. A lot of realtors don't use this, and it frustrates the heck out of your sellers because they need to know what they're going to walk away with, and the only thing they know about is their commission. So we take 3 columns. One is called Perfect World, one is called Reasonable, and one's called Ugly. So in our market, with it running 98% of list, my categories here, Perfect World is going to be a full price offer. So I can tell my seller, if we get a full price offer, that is Perfect World. We sign it, we dance on the table, we celebrate. Reasonable, in my calculations here, we have it at 95%. And the reason it's at 95 when the market's at 98 is so I can under promise and over deliver. That's very critical. And as realtors, we're so busy being positive, we often find ourselves under delivering because we were trying so hard. Give yourself some room to exceed. Ugly is going to be 10% off, so a 90% environment, because in our market, depending on condition, this is going to be a price that would make the house go away. Now, I love sellers. They look at this column first and they say, I ain't selling it for that. I'm not giving it away. I say, I know you're not giving it away. Settle down there, cowboy. This is a number that if the house must go away, this is the number we are going to be at. So if we're not here, that's fine, but every seller needs to know what that number actually is. Then I have my commission, and the amount that I charge is divided into 2 buckets because we do give half to the buyer's agent. And this, y'all, by the way, is your best chance to get your seller to bring you recommendations. Do not ask for referrals because the word referral sounds like you're looking for a kickback. I ask my seller to recommend me, and I don't do dual agency. I do designated dual in North Carolina, but on my sellers, I won't work the buyer. And a lot of y'all, I know that you love dual agency, so just bear with me. This is a philosophical thing for me. I don't believe that any realtor can properly represent a seller if you're also representing the buyer. I know you'll argue with me till the cows come home, but it's a conflict of interest to me. If I'm trying to get the seller the best dollar, I cannot simultaneously get the buyer the best dollar. So what I tell my sellers is this: I'm going to give away half the commission, all right? In fact, on this house, I'm giving away $28,000. And when you use those words, they start to see it differently than if you say, I'm going to give half my commission away. So getting specific can really be a benefit to you. You're going to say, I'm going to give away $28,000, but I need you to help me replace that. Who can you recommend to me that would help me replace the money I give away, because I'm determined to only work for you? And so then they want to bring you people because you are telling them you're giving away that income so you can protect them. Well, they love to help build that back in for you. So try that language. In our state, we have state revenue stamps. You've got deed prep and recording fees for canceling the mortgage. And throughout here, just plug in the numbers that are normal in your area so that you can help the seller get as close as possible to a reasonable bottom line. And don't forget to budget for repairs. The budget that I use is $1,000 for every 10 years old the house is. Obviously, if I've gone to the home and it's got more than that, I can adjust the spreadsheet pretty quickly. But I want to make sure that they know we're going to have some kind of a budget here for those repairs. And this has kept us in line, and often we can exceed their expectations because on most houses it winds up being less than this budget amount. I'll tell you with a net proceeds sheet, you want your seller to initial it at the interview. You want it initialed at the time of offer so that you can prove you gave them the offer. You want to get a copy of this initial with the contract and take them to closing. So that if your seller wants to perform some kind of a commissionectomy on you and make you pay something because they say you didn't tell them, when you can show them the net proceeds sheet and say, look, I explained this to you 3 times and you initialed it 3 times, they'll stop trying to get in your pocket for money that's really unfair of them to ask for. The last thing I want to show you is a new tool that I've been using. It's called rentrange.com. I'm completely in love with this. If you're working with an investor or you're working with somebody who wants to know what the potential rental is on a property before they decide to sell it, RentRange is a third-party company. It costs a couple bucks to run a report for a house. It's a slight investment and you're a seller. But what it will tell you is the rental estimate on the house and vacancy rates. It will show you what they get for their house based on the year it was built, bedrooms and bathrooms and zip code. Fantastic source. That's rentrange.com. So if you work with a lot of investors, it's fantastic for buyers. But if your sellers are investors as well, and a lot of my investors will say, well, we don't know if we want to sell it or keep it, I can then pull this report and help them say, well, your rents are here, the price is here, and that makes me the resource who tells them keep it or don't. So with that being said, if you've not bought my book, it's at outrageousauthenticity.com. I'd love it if you get a copy. It's a 45-minute realtor read. And I've got my new podcast is out. It's called Crazy Shit in Real Estate with Leigh Brown, where I've got realtors. Kimberly, it's long-term rentals. It's not weekly resort rentals. I take that back. I haven't run one in a resort market. I'm using it for 12-month or more rentals in Charlotte, which is not resort. But anyway, the podcast, if you've got something you've done or seen in real estate that's absolutely crazy, I'd love to have you as a guest on the podcast. What our focus is here is to showcase the professionalism of realtors in no matter what situation they're facing, and it helps our consumers understand why we're worth exactly what we're worth. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you investing in your business. I hope you got enough notes to start implementing some of these tools into your listings. I promise y'all, this will completely change your listings. You will win more listings this way, and you're going to be the best realtor in your market. You're going to get a copy of this webinar as soon as it finishes processing in the system, so you can watch it again anytime. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please follow me on all these different sites, and whatever resources you need in your business, education you need, shoot me a note. Let me know. I'd love to provide that for you because I love nothing more than making realtors better. So with that, go forth, be successful, and have a great day.